I'm Michelle.
And I'm Catherine.
And we're here at the Healthy Hurried Human podcast,
where we talk about keeping pace in a world that never slows down. Being emotionally grounded. This episode is going to cover a lot of ground, but also I think a lot of us have an idea in our mind about what it means to be emotionally grounded, and maybe we're going to stir some things up.
I think we might. Simply put, emotionally grounded is being aware of our patterns and being willing to make adjustments. I can't think of there's no reason to try to make this sound bigger than it is. Being emotionally grounded is being aware of our patterns and making adjustments. It really, to oversimplify it, is, we could say, emotional regulation. Mm-hmm. Learning to practice and demonstrate emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm. I think that this one to me is not a far stretch for me to understand why this is important.
Right.
But go ahead and let's just discuss why this one is almost always in one of the top ones we lead with when we are presenting this.
So being emotionally grounded, also demonstrating that we know how to regulate our emotions. This is important because this is kind of the way I like to, it's running in the background 100% of the time. Maybe not when we're sleeping, but when we're awake, emotional grounded is running in the background all the time because we are constantly assessing if we are significant and if we're safe. That's what even if we're not conscious of it, we walk in to a room of people and we're assessing, where am I going to be significant? Where am I going to feel safe? And if we aren't tuned into that, then we don't respond. We don't give ourselves the time to respond. We react because we're not being conscious of the fact that you're always assessing where you're at. And when you're assessing and when we are emotionally grounded and when we have learned to regulate our emotions, that's what you give yourself the breadth, the space to then make responses versus reacting.
I think when you and I were discussing this, you made a comment that we're also assessing other people mm-hmm. and their emotional state. And the easiest illustration that comes to my mind is, as most women do, when we are leaving a place and walking through a parking lot. And it's like we are aware, not just of the cars, but we're aware of what car is parked next to us. And we go into assessment mode. Right. And it's very easy at that point for it to be in our conscious because we have been taught that this is a vulnerable spot.
That's right.
Transitioning, getting into a car, unloading our groceries. And so when you first described this to me, that was the analogy that I had. And when I layer that on and I think about work conferences I've gone to or walking into a boardroom, and you're assessing the tension that's there or the emotion that's running, or it truly is something that you're consciously or unconsciously
all
running.
The time. Yes.
And so what you're saying is it kind of boils down to, am I safe or significant? And I was thinking about another one that we've done, purpose driven. What is my role here? And we're evaluating these situations a lot. Is that only if we're emotionally grounded, or is everyone doing it?
Is everyone evaluating? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we all, because it's part of the human experience. And that's why I say, I'm going to keep saying this. You're going to be like, stop saying that. But the running in the background of the unconscious, I love your analogy of we are very conscious of it when we are in a safety situation. We feel, and women tend to ignite this a little bit more than men because we're more of an antenna.
There you go.
That Southern accent's trying to come out. We feel the things, whereas men are more concrete when it comes to emotional outside influences. But men are doing this too. It's our human experience to be running in the background, wondering if we are significant, if we're safe. I would say women tend to not. I don't. The generalization here. We're just saying, kind of by nature, by gender. Women tend to do it more on the safety side of things, whereas men are looking for significance. The male ego, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but the male ego that's looking for, am I going to stand out? That's what they are consciously running in the background, trying to make sure that they have their place. That's kind of how men and women can be wired to be. But emotional regulation is something we start picking up on. We come into the world looking for the person who's looking for us. Babies are born looking for the person, their mother, who is looking for them. And so all of your childhood, that's why we know that children can really tune into, they may not be able to label the room, but children can pick up on the energy in the room because theirs is running in the background. Am I going to be safe? Am I loved here? Am I significant? Am I important? And so we carry that through our entire life. It just looks different at different phases, at different times, different ages.
I can think of like 14 different analogies about finding, your eyes meeting across the room with the person you were looking for, or your crush, or your parent, in many different ways, just, hopefully the relief or the joy that brings, but it can also be on the flip side of the person you're like, I need to avoid, or, but we've all talked about, sometimes people, just by the way they come into the office, you can tell they've got a dark cloud over their head, or you go into a conversation and the hot topic points that, and I talked about a situation in one of our previous episodes about one of my colleagues who did me a really great favor by pulling me aside and saying, your passion is being not received as passion in the boardroom. It's coming across as either argumentative, or it's making other people defensive, or what the boss is hearing is you saying this can't be done, instead of you saying, hey, we've got to find a path forward. And my coworker did just a great gift to me, to come and really was talking to me about, was making me aware
of your pattern,
of my pattern.
Right.
And it was such a gift and trust building. I guess we were talking about trust building. It was such a great gift in a trust building situation for me, because when you know something, the more that you know, the more choices you have and options to take. And that was knowing that I had the option to choose my actions and behaviors. And that really, to me, is when emotional grounding takes place. Because what I think is really interesting that you said is that it doesn't mean that you're perfect in it every day.
That's right.
It's that you course correct. And the more you practice, the sooner you correct.
I think that the most stifling narrative that a person can have, and that tells me that they are not emotionally grounded, is the narrative of, this is who I am. This is the way I am. That is not emotionally grounded. So being emotionally grounded isn't that you're flawless, that you have reached perfection. It's that you're becoming aware of your patterns and deciding to make adjustments. Being open to that, hearing it from a coworker, hearing it from a spouse, hearing it. It's happened to me. One of my children pointed out one of my patterns to me one time. And I tell you what, it was so eye-opening to hear a child say, I don't know if you know that this is how I feel when you speak to me in this tone. I wanted to make adjustments very quickly. But we can, if you notice yourself saying, well, that's who I am, that's how I am, or that's a you problem. not saying there's not a place and time for that, but you understand what I'm saying, that if that's our narrative, you're not emotionally grounded. You're living in defense mode. You're living in I want to hide mode from who I am. And you probably live in a bit of a narcissistic mode because you want everybody around you to make adjustments, but not you.
So let's talk about like subjectivity about this. Like some people may say, this is just who I am. And I know that in a workplace, sometimes people just are that way. You know what's going to set them off. You know how to push their buttons, or you know that they're really sensitive to certain things. I mean, we all do it. And some of it is just allowances. Like, I think that's what makes us colorful. Or
right.
Some people feel more comfortable with the emotion of anger than they do with the emotion of sadness, and they'll react a certain way. But when is it subjective, the emotional behavior?
For me, the filter or the grid that I judge that on is it reaction or is it response? So even with response, we could say response can also be coping mechanisms. And so we can say, even though someone responds this way, they're not reactive. This is how they respond to certain stimulation. But is it a coping mechanism? We're going to get into that, I think, in a couple of episodes about coping mechanisms, that kind of stuff. But really, it's the filter of, are you reacting or are you responding? So if someone's go-to emotion is anger because sadness is too uncomfortable for them, are they doing that in response? Because we can have anger. Anger isn't always a negative emotion. But if we do it in a way that is destructive, we are destructive to people, places, things, that's a reaction. A response, a person who's emotionally grounded takes their anger and crafts a response to it and says, we're going to address this. This upsets me. And it may be to the listener, it's not really that you're angry. It's really that you're sad or you're fearful. That's okay. You're still hearing their response. You're opening the invitation and you're open for the communication and the relationship to continue, whether it's a coworker relationship, because we can do more with response than we can with reaction. Reaction oftentimes mean we have to clean up. We have to spend our time cleaning up after the reaction. So I think filtering it through, I love that you pointed that out, that this can be subjective to people, but what takes the subjectivity out is looking at it from, is this a reaction or is this a response?
So the regulation of it, like you can be right, but it doesn't mean that you should lose your cool. And learning the difference between that is really, I think for emotionally grounded, it's moving to I don't want to call it a higher level, but a more
higher functioning
level by your awareness and understanding and seeing it in yourself and saying, this is not the response I want to have.
Yeah.
This is not the experience that I want to have.
It can also be, going back to the whole pattern idea, a quick little story here. Just recently working with one of my female CEOs who's always run a female-centric business. Just how it happened for her is, and then she has now partnered, and the new partner is a male. She is still the CEO, but this partner is very strong personality. And as I'm leading her through some of these changes, she's backing down, or she's going inward. And as we were unpacking this, she said, yeah, I tend to do that because I get intimidated. We can trace that back to, her dad, the way her dad raised her, that kind of thing. But she said, I get really intimidating, even though this partner is not intimidating. It's just my go-to reaction when I'm working with men. And after unpacking that, my challenge to her was to help her see her pattern. And she did. That just a man just being a man, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with him or that he's bringing in anything he shouldn't to the table. It was just her pattern of how she responds to a man being her equal or doing a job with her. And it was really interesting to be able to help her work through that and to give her the empowerment of, this is a partner that you guys are equals in this venture. And so here's some steps I want you to take so that you aren't hiding and so that you aren't going inward. And so now she can have a thoughtful response to, but she now understands and sees what her pattern is. And she's not going to be perfect because behavior patterns take a little time to change, but they don't change if we don't ever look at them.
At one of my previous jobs, we used a job behavior assessment, and the consultant told a great story about being in a really toxic work environment, and her natural pattern of behavior, she had to squelch because it was so unwelcome. And she went to a new working environment and had to be coached back into her strengths and her patterns because she had had such a bad experience that she had to really default to a person that she wasn't in behavioral or patterns, or she couldn't really display her strengths. It was seen as threatening. And this new job wanted her to be strong in those areas and wanted her to excel. And it took a time for her to get out of that. So there are sometimes situations in unhealthy work environments.
That's right.
Where your strength is not welcomed, or it's seen as threatening, or you get a person in there who starts doing character assassination by calling you out in a group of people, and because they're either jealous of you or they're angry at you, and there are all sorts of dynamics that take place. And we don't talk a ton about emotional intelligence, but emotional intelligence is really running through a lot of our different spokes on the wheel.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And this is one of them, is much more, this one, instead of emotional intelligence, we like to talk about the term self-mastery when it comes to things like
That's
this.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And this is truly knowing yourself and yourself in that situation, because you are not going to be able to control the behaviors on the other side of the conference table from you.
That's right.
You're just
not.
Mm-hmm. And you can, I can think of 2 or 3 situations. I have a lot of opinions, and I don't mind sharing them, and I'm very curious, and so I'll ask questions. And I was brought in to be with all of the heads of the company because we were adopting another initiative to try to get us all working on the same page. And I was going to be the one that was going to have to go train the rest of the company. So I am the low man on the totem pole, and in a room where I'm the only female with 14 men, and 14 men that outrank me. And I was trying to hone in by asking a question very specifically and very targeted about what one of the men had said, because I needed to understand how his answer was accepted, because it didn't line up with what we were told. And boy, he took it personally. And I was shocked by his reaction, because he reacted to me, not to the question. And I was really shocked by it. But like, the bigger perspective is that man had never, ever spoken to me like that before. He wasn't a person that ever reacted or was hard to work for with women in the company. I mean, he and I was so shocked by his response, but realized we were all tired. It was the end of the day, and I was unknowingly just kind of seeming like I was targeting him out, because in my mind, I'm like, I have really got to understand this, because I've got to be the one that's got to go and teach it. And I just remember afterwards realizing I also had a choice to give him grace and to say, he's never treated me poorly. My feelings were really kind of hurt. But one of the guys addressed him and said, listen, we're all allowed to question each other. Don't take that personally from Catherine. But it was a big ordeal that later it really affected me. I was really shaken by it. And I was sitting at this boardroom going, don't get emotional, don't react, just be like, oh, what's wrong with that guy? And so, and trying not to talk about it afterwards, right? Because for the good of the community, it was kind of a one-off situation. But I realized, reflecting on myself, was like, there has to have been a better way to have done that, right? Like, what's a better way for me to ask my questions? Because I was really only thinking about myself in that situation. And I was calling him out and saying, but what, this guy, he just didn't give the right answer. And how are we accepting it? It's just type of thing. And it's, sometimes you got to give your coworkers, some understanding in situations like this.
We do. I think so. Being emotionally grounded. So I can hear it now. Some of the responses that are hearing this to think that, Catherine, he was in the wrong and you shouldn't feel like it was any of your fault, because it's that we want to be careful not to make ourselves the victim mentality. And there is some truth to that. But I think it's always okay for us to say, did I contribute to this? Could I have done anything different to not have that happen? Now, sometimes the answer is no. It's no. You and I know of my big story of going to lunch with somebody who just lost their stuff over a really simple get to know you question that had nothing, when we peeled back, it had nothing to do with me. But my first response was, what did I do wrong? And I think that's a natural human question and response. And sometimes there is something to learn. I think for you, I love that you give grace in this situation. I know exactly when you need to know something, when you need to understand it, you're like a dog with a chew toy, like a rope, and it won't let go.
I really do want to dig in there.
Right.
Yeah.
But I know that about you, and I know that you're not coming at me. And I don't really take it as that. I don't see it as that, mainly because I know you, and I know that's not what Catherine's about. Catherine is not trying to belittle me or take me down a notch you're not doing that. So whether or not he knew that about you, but that's how he took it in this scenario.
We had worked, it really truly was just a culmination of the fact that I kept
going,
trying to make, I was just, and I had prefaced it by saying, hey, this isn't an attack against you, but this is because this is the type of response that it needs to be a lot more specific.
Right.
And his response was much more directed at me. And I was just kind of shocked, but I know it wasn't anything that I had done. There was no way in that moment for me to have said anything, but I think about other scenarios like my niece who is looking for jobs, and she'll come to me and say, oh, I found this job. And this literally happened. I was like, that's not going to work. And here are the reasons why. And I finally I realized before I said that I know how I think and how I operate about things like that. And I said, okay, let me preface this. And that was not the right response I should have given, because I just said, listen, how about I point out some obstacles I see? You clear the obstacles, take the job. Like, Like, and
There you go.
Like, I have learned that sometimes, and sometimes it's the second thing I say, not the first, where I will say, okay, I'm going to list what I, off the top of my head, or having had experience in this, what I see are going to be some obstacles. And that doesn't mean don't do it. And it doesn't mean I don't support it. It just means let's get through this. And I learned that in business is that I would have to say to the CEO or the visionary in the room, I've got this great idea. And I'm like, have a very quick mind and a long timeline, and I can throw out these, and I can see where the hurdles we have to cross.
Right.
And what I've had to learn is to say, it's great, we're on board. I see some challenges ahead that we're going to clear for you, but I may want to, that doesn't have to be the first sentence you say. And that, to me, is somewhat of a, maybe that is emotionally regulating. Is it not? Or is it?
It's emotional regulation. Here's what, two things. One is we gave a very simple definition of what is emotionally grounded. And it's being aware of your patterns, being willing to make the adjustments. Simple, simple, simple. But it's not. The explanation, the definition of this is simple. The work behind it is not. And that's important for everyone to know. Is it may be real simple to recognize your patterns. Making the adjustments can be very difficult because of so many things, our emotional connection to it, the role that we bring, the value that we see we have or don't have. There are so many things that come to that adjustment, that we filter through in making that adjustment. It's not easy. I mean, people have written books upon books on how to do this. If emotional regulation was easy, I would have been the perfect parent this morning. I was preparing for this episode last night, so it's real right there in the front of my mind. And boy, my children can push that button trying to get them out the door for school. And it was, as they left this morning, my husband and I did not get an A+ in getting everybody out to school this morning. And I literally thought, well, there was some real good emotional regulation there, Michelle.
The crazy, job. I did the same thing this morning. I went to put ice in my cup and there was no ice, and I was like, how simple is it just to turn the ice maker on when you take the last bit of ice? And I realized nobody living in this household is doing anything wrong. I'm late. I'm thinking through what I need to bring to today. I don't have everything together. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, I could regulate my emotions. I mean, it was
right. It's like it's like the Sound of Music. We need what's her name to like come and sing to us to remind us. I'm like, I wish a bell would go off, or the way you're training. I'm training a puppy. Also, we should put that in there. I need something to be like, ding, ding, ding. This mm-hmm. is where you're supposed to. Yeah. That is the hard part. Is I can see my patterns all day long, mm-hmm. making the adjustments, doing the things that I need to do to regulate. That is not simple work. It is hard work. And I want anyone who's listening to understand that. It's an easy thing to say, become aware of what you're doing, and then just simply adjust it. It's not that simple. It's the human struggle. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's important for everyone to know, and to give grace for yourself, mm-hmm. and to give grace to others.
We're going to talk about aligning with your coworkers in future podcast, and connecting about different things. And humility is something that I think touches on a couple of different things that we talk about. And this is also one for me, just a little bit of humbleness of making the apology, acknowledging the behavior that you want to change. When I was working in customer service, one of the things I learned very, very early on is that customer knows when you are not being honest about a delay in their order or whatever. And I learned the fastest way that I could get to saying, we made the mistake, or this was delayed, that it helped reduce the trust level, or help reduce that lack of trust that was building, mm-hmm. because they just knew when you were covering. And it's always better, I have found, to acknowledge when you acknowledge if you need to go and apologize, or just to say, hey, I'm going to do better. Even if it's to yourself, go back to your desk and say, well, I want to do better next time, or this is what I want to do, how I want to grow. I think that that is such a key part of so much of this is realizing that you are trying and training to be a better version of yourself, a healthier version of yourself, showing up better, regulated, and emotionally grounded for the people around you.
I mean, can you imagine if, because we always talk about, well, what would this look like at work? Mm-hmm. Can you imagine? You and I we would be out of work a lot, but if workplaces, work environments, if every single human being in that environment was consciously, not unconsciously, consciously working on their emotional regulation, if every person in a work environment was consciously working on emotional regulation, you would have real close to perfected work environments. Maybe not perfect work, but the environments would be lovely if every person was just consciously working at that. Mm-hmm. Because that meant that when someone fell askew, you could say, hey, just want to make you aware to this pattern. And the person would say, oh my, let me work on that.
Well, I will say that specifically with my coworker, there was a measure of trust there. He could come and say that to me because we had a good relationship. Mm-hmm. There are times when people can come and point out your flaws, and it is not with kindness and it is not for goodness. And you don't need to, that is, not brought with the best intention. And there was a proverb my mother made me memorize when I was little that said, the wise man listens to the rebuke of a fool. And that has been ingrained in me of, even if they're coming with malintent or if they're coming to be negative, take a minute and say, is there any truth in this that I could learn from and to become better? And then good. Move on. I mean, it is, when I remember it, it's a good life pattern to have.
Well, that goes back to something you and I talk about, is that we can learn something from every single mm-hmm. person. We can, if we're open to it. But emotional regulation is really key for our success in the workplace, especially if we are a leader of people, because whatever we do is going to trickle down. So if we have a reaction that is poor, then that tells anybody underneath us who is also a leader of people that it's okay to have a reaction that is poor, and it trickles on down. Mm-hmm. But if we have a response of grace or humility or of teaching or of softness, that also trickles down, and it shows the others that we put in charge or that we charge with influence over other people. Response is the requirement over reaction.
Mm-hmm. And also, if you've had a poor response, a follow-up, when you recognize that your behavior wasn't what you wanted, especially in leadership, to have an apology or a follow-up or an acknowledgement. And if the negative was on display in large quantities, the repair has to be on display in large quantities.
That's
too.
right. You and I have been around to see work environments change a lot, even, being in college and new workforce people in the 90s all the way to today. And we've seen the trends and we've seen it. But you and I think, have heard the stories, or we've experienced it, where in the boardroom or the higher up that you went, that it was almost excused for bad behavior, for reactions, for these explosions. And people would make excuses for the leader, or they own the company, or because I'm the CEO, or because I am the leader, I get to have these reactions and these,
angry episodes.
Yeah, these angry episodes, and everybody else has to kind of fix it and insulate them, right? Or explain them away, or they're eccentric. There's a famous one that people would talk about that would say, well, he's just real eccentric, mm-hmm. To explain away the bad behaviors. And it's really important to know that when we are charged with the influence of other people, whether you're a mid-level manager, whether you are an executive, you're the president, you're the CEO, you are charged with the care of other people. And that is no small thing. Mm-hmm. Just like to parents. I think anyone who is a good, decent parent would say, I'm in charge. My children are expecting me to emotionally regulate for their benefit. I certainly benefit from it, but they benefit from it even more. I think we have to take that same weight of responsibility when we are in the workplace. That if anyone looks to me for anything, I need to be very careful. This is good, holy work to work on regulating my emotions, to be emotionally grounded, to do the work to understand what my patterns are and make the adjustments so that leads me to how we're going to end this. I want to recommend this book by Dr. Nicole LaPera. It's How to Do the Work. I recommend this book so often to people, and oftentimes it's my workforce CEOs who are interested in doing this book. But she has a lot of great tools and strategies for how to do emotional regulation work.
Thanks, Michelle.
The Healthy Hurried Human podcast is presented by Foxygen Consulting. At Foxygen, we provide business and performance psychology and consulting. We believe healthier people make a healthier workplace. Foxygen Consulting, breathing new life into your organization.